There is a place where fears and fantasies give weight on substance alone. Legends and lures are examined in a fresh light. Conspiracy theory meets conspiracy fact. We've embraced the possibilities. Now beyond the threshold, you are in the new realm.
Just out of nowhere, we've seen this huge white light coming in over the horizon. I started getting this demonic some strange object in the sky. And I tried to scream, and I tried to wake up, and I couldn't. UFOs, cosmology, paranormal, and abduction. The shadow people or the Djinn or some other things by demonic in nature. Demonic in nature.
I want to know. I'm Anthony Kay. With me is Sam Muranto and John Stephenson.
With us now is none other than a new person that I just met recently at a conference and who I just think the world of, Rosemary Ellen Guiley. Rosemary, how are you?
Well, I'm doing great, Sam. It was a spectacular conference there in Lawrence, Kansas, that UFO conference, and it was such a delight to see you and Julie and also a lot of friends I have in ufology that I don't see very often.
Yes, there's such a mix of people, and each of us, like I always point out, this is all about people, and we are a mix, aren't we?
It certainly is. It's a very interesting community.
One thing you've taken an interest in and wrote a very nice book is on the Djinn, and John Stephenson's here, and we were talking right before giving you a call, and his area of expertise, of course, is paranormal. And I think we're going to have a very good conversation here. Can you tell us about how you got into the interest into the Djinn?
It actually began back in the 1980s for me, and I came across them while I was researching other topics, angels, demons, and Solomonic magic. And I didn't know much about the Djinn. In fact, I didn't realize that they were the entities behind what we know as the genie in the bottle. And the term Djinn got translated as genie when the old ancient Arabian folktales were translated for the European and English-speaking markets back in the 1800s. So I thought that was interesting, but it was clear to me very quickly that there was far more to the Djinn than this genie in the bottle idea, which our culture has always treated in kind of a humorous way. You know, we don't really take them seriously. But the Djinn are a race of entities. They are quite formidable in their intelligence and their supernatural abilities and power. And as I got deeper into my paranormal investigation over the years, it became apparent to me that the characteristics that they have certainly could account for a lot of peculiar cases that investigators run into that defy explanation.
These entities may account for some crossover type phenomena as far as intradimensional or extra-dimensional beings?
Yes, in fact, there's quite a wide range of cases that they might account for. They have the ability to shapeshift. They live for a very long period of time. They're known to be very vengeful and revenge-oriented. And the creation stories and the lore that's told about them, which I believe has basis in fact, describes them as, at least a portion of them, as wanting their homeland back. They were pushed out of this world, this dimension, a long time ago. They pre-existed us. They were pushed out in favor of us. And some of them want the place back, like a lot of people might want their home back if they felt it was taken forcefully away from them. And they have the ability to come into our dimension, but not to stay for very long periods. Things have changed quite a bit since then. And they are capable of interacting with us in various ways. They can cause possession. They can disguise themselves as a lot of different kinds of entities. And we feel that they're pursuing their own agendas under these guises. We think in some cases we're dealing with demons or fairies or ETs or mysterious creatures, and they may be Djinn in disguise. We don't think that the Djinn account for everything. We don't treat them as one-stop shopping for all paranormal events. But we do think that they are a player, and that some of the experiences and cases that are resistant to resolution, that don't seem to fit into this category or that category, might possibly be Djinn.
It's actually interesting. I'm not even familiar with them, and I'm into paranormal. I'm one of those people, I gotta confess, I didn't really know anything about them.
Well, they've done such a good job of remaining hidden that you have to hand it to them. Their name means the hidden ones, and even in ancient times, way before they were absorbed into Islam, the Djinn were renowned for being aloof, feeling superior to human beings, being able to influence human beings. They were greatly feared, and they still are in many parts of the Middle East today. But entities are not limited by geography. Their primary creation stories and mythologies and folklore may originate in certain parts of the world, but entities have the ability to be everywhere, and we think that's the case with the Djinn.
What do they do? I mean, is like poltergeist activity could be a Djinn, or I mean, what are they known for doing, or how do they interact with us?
They were blamed, like demons, they were blamed for all the ills that befell humanity. They were, especially in ancient times, especially associated with plague-bearing winds that came out of the desert, bad luck, accidents, financial ruin, illness, poltergeist disturbances, you name it.
So kind of like the black arts of nowadays.
That's actually interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. That is really.
One of the things that people ask, how do we know it's Djinn and not just some poltergeist spirit or a demon or something like that? Well, sometimes it is hard to tell right off the bat, and you have to do a process of elimination. Ultimately, Djinn will reveal themselves, but of course, if we don't ask the right questions or look in the right directions or make premature assumptions, we won't find that out. The Djinn are interested in themselves and their own agendas. When demons interact with us, it's with the idea of soul subversion. We consider demons to be all evil. Actually, in ancient lore, they weren't all evil, and I don't think all demons are, but the satanic demons that we are focused on in Western society are evil and work for Satan in soul subversion. When Djinn possess, they possess for their self-interest, because they want to have a vicarious physical experience, because they want to mess around with somebody, because they want to see how long they can stay in the physical world. They will use someone's soul energy, and they will enter into pacts with people. But it's a different orientation.
That's
so
really interesting.
There's self-interest involved. They can attach to people. Some of them are curious about people and even infatuated or enamored with people, much like some of the fairies that we read about in lore. And others are hostile. And their idea is that they belong here and we don't, and they want to, pardon the expression, they want to bedevil us until we get out of the space they want.
That is really interesting, actually. I mean, I'm almost ashamed that I really don't know about them. It's hard to imagine how many things they might have done that have been blamed on other entities or other things.
Geez, John, you're a paranormal guy. What the
Yeah.
hell living, man?
I mean, we don't
John,
know. None of us.
You got plenty of company. It took a while for us to put this case together, and it was. Look, I started putting the Djinn on my radar back in the 1980s, and it wasn't until I got, years on down the road in paranormal investigation when I just had, just a lot of cases that just sort of fell through the cracks, like, what the heck's going on here? Nothing seems to get rid of this entity. And when you start applying the Djinn explanation to them, then things start to make sense. And as we're getting this word out into the paranormal community, we're getting feedback corroborating this from investigation teams. So I think that we've hit on something that is of great value, not just to the paranormal community, but the ufological community as well, because there's an ET connection here. And they may have an agenda that, well, it could work with ETs, but it may work at cross purposes too.
Something I just stumbled across, and you may know about, is that in 1998, a Pakistani nuclear scientist had mentioned that if we were to tap the energy of the Djinn because they're made of fire, we could solve the energy crisis. Did you hear about that?
Well, it's interesting because in their creation story, they were made of smokeless fire, which translates into plasma. And the angels were made out of pure spiritual light, the Djinn plasma, and then when human beings came along, they were made out of the clay, the earth and water. Well, when Phil was in the Middle East, which was around 1995, he was traveling around, and actually he was doing some research on, he was in Israel doing research on the Holy Grail, and he started hearing a lot about Djinn. And he went into Syria and heard more about the Djinn, and he thought, who are these Djinn? I've got to find out about them. And people said, oh no, you don't want to do that. They're greatly feared. Well, he winds up through his contacts going into Saudi Arabia, where he was a dinner guest in the royal household. And a member of the royal family told him that his government of Saudi Arabia and the American government very much wanted to capture a Jinn, which makes sense.
Interesting. Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure we'd like to get ETs too.
Yeah, sure.
Around, but if the Jinn have the ability to use this plasmic form to interfere with our physical form, they're very sensitive to electromagnetic fields. Yes, it would be of interest for various authorities to try and get hold of one. I'm not sure they could because they can shapeshift and go through matter, and it may never happen, but the interest could be there.
I know I'm going to be doing some research tonight. That's very intriguing.
Oh, yeah. So
I would like to mention as a starting point, we have a new website up called DjinnUniverse.com, and that's DJINN universe.com, where we've posted some excerpts from the book, a few articles. We have a discussion forum for people and investigators to post their experiences. And we also have a resource list. It's basically our bibliography from the book, and it cites the sources, the popular literature, the Islamic literature, and the anthropological literature and magical literature, all of these sources that we used for references, and then we include some helpful websites as well. So it's a great starting point.
I'll put all your links on our page, too. Probably later tonight, I'll put everything up there you have.
Mentioned Mothman a second ago, too.
Uh-oh. Mothy. They do like Mothy here.
Yeah, we haven't really had much discussion on the Mothman, which I really feel cheated, because I really wanted to talk a lot about Mothman.
I had mentioned you have some knowledge of Mothy, I as I recall. Is that not correct, Rosemary?
Well, in fact, I'm working on a book on Mothman. I've been interested in Mothman for a long time. In my research, I've been full-time in the paranormal since the 1980s, and being a curious person, I make inquiries into everything and discover the interrelationships between a lot of the strange things out there. And John Keel was a very good friend of mine, so that was another impetus to get deeper into the Mothman territory. And I spend, even for living in Connecticut, I spend a fair amount of time in West Virginia, and I, since 2004, have participated in the Mothman Festival. And I've gotten to know a lot of the people down there in Point Pleasant. And there's Mothman is an unknown entity, and what Keel called ultra-terrestrial. And when the flap occurred back in 66, 67, really the bulk of the activity was UFO. It was mysterious lights and craft. It was contact with entities, all the phenomena that are associated with UFO waves, the poltergeist stuff, phone disturbances, men in black. And then along comes Mothman, who kind of steals the show.
Yeah.
As an entity who is really not overtly aggressive or hostile to people, seemed to exhibit more curiosity about them than anything else. And we have to ask the question, what was Mothman? And could this have been a Djinn? And the reason why I ask that question is that the Djinn love weird forms.
There you go.
They're very good at shape-shifting, and they like disturbing forms.
Do you think I'm a Djinn?
Sorry?
Do you think I'm a Djinn? I don't know.
I've
Maybe.
seen Sam in some pretty disturbing forms. Oh man.
So it's possible. I mean, let's just speculate, and we have to speculate a lot in the paranormal, that some portal opens up and there's this wave of stuff that's UFO oriented, and probably all sorts of things fly and crawl through this portal. And a Djinn, probably a more immature Djinn who's more curious about people than hostile, comes through in this Mothman form as a way of kind of hanging out and participating in the action. It's not out of the realm of possibility, because that would fit certain Djinn personalities.
Yeah.
Well, those Djinns, they're responsible for everything.
Yeah,
My gosh.
You know what's funny is 1967 and 66 were years of tremendous UFO activity, and this also was the period, the time of the Mothman sightings, not just in Mount Pleasant, or Point Pleasant, but throughout the United States. There were multiple sightings of depictions of similar creatures being seen.
Well, there have been a lot of these dark-winged humanoid forms sighted, and even around the world.
Yes.
Mothman certainly got the most attention, but so who knows whether Mothman was part of a species in its own right in a parallel dimension, or a shape-shifted form of Djinn, or something that exists in its own right that the Djinn just kind of borrowed for a while. It's difficult to answer, but I think we have to ask these questions, because that's what sparks ideas for additional research, or somebody making a connection between 2 points that hadn't been previously connected.
Now, as far as shadow people, which is another topic you touched on in your presentation that I was just mesmerized by at the conference. I really enjoyed it. The shadow people, John had some experience as far as taking some photos and working on some cases.
In them, yeah.
What's your take on them, Rosemary?
Well, up until recently, a few years ago, I considered shadow people to be an unknown ultra-terrestrial with probably a hostile agenda. And I had started studying them in earnest in late 04, as a result of just getting a lot of inquiries from readers and fans on the internet, telling me their experiences and asking me what the heck happened. And when I get a lot like that come in a bump, I start looking into things. I think that maybe some sort of wave of experience is opening up. And I discovered that this phenomenon called shadow people, or the Hat Man, is very old, very extensive, and probably one of the most underreported experiences out there. And the silhouette of a tall man, usually wearing a coat and hat, is a bedroom visitor, shows up in the bedroom, no features, often radiates intense evil. and terrifies people. Doesn't communicate, so you don't know what it wants. It seems to be solid, and yet it can vanish in a heartbeat. And sometimes people are plagued by these visitations throughout their life, no matter where they go. And sometimes they stop. They start and stop for no reason, no apparent reason, or they stop when somebody moves, which indicates there might be an anchor in the land. And in interviewing people, because I found that, especially with the people who are the repeat experiencers, these are individuals who are experience-prone. They usually had some market opening in childhood, and wherever they go, they have a lot of paranormal experiences throughout life of varying sorts. And this proved to be pretty much the case with the regular shadow people experiencers. In addition to that, I discovered that many of them were ET experiencers, either contact or abduction or both. Well, that made me very curious, because I had already ruled out they're not human ghosts. In fact, I didn't think there was anything human of them. There are dark figures that haunt places, kind of shadowy ghosts, but shadow people are not ghosts. They're not really poltergeists. They're not demons. They're not elementals. So what the heck are they besides ultra-terrestrial?
Yeah.
So I began to wonder if they were a form of ET. Were they doing like advanced scouting or monitoring or programming or information gathering that might then be used by the abducting ETs or the contacting ETs? And I entertained the idea, were they drones, artificial intelligence, some ultra-terrestrials co-opted or hired by ETs? You know, I started thinking of all sorts of things. And then when I looked at them from the Djinn perspective, I came to the conclusion that shadow people are Djinn. And I think that Djinn have an intense interest in the ET agenda with people, because here you've got these ETs coming and contacting people, abducting them, and by all these reports, creating this hybrid program. Well, if you were an entity like the Djinn, and you were trying to get your ancient homeland back, and then you had these other guys come along who are interested in human beings as well for their own purposes, well, that's kind of at cross purposes to you. And so it could very well be that the shadow people are keeping tabs, especially on the ET experiencers. They certainly want information from human beings, and many experiencers say that they feel like they're being penetrated and probed by these entities. They may be, while we sleep and are very vulnerable, they might be getting information from us of a physiological, biological, neurological nature, even our thought processes, anything that might be useful to them. And maybe some of them are trying to figure out what the ETs are so interested in. So that's where I'm standing with that right now. I think the shadow people are Djinn, and they have a particular interest in this ET intervention with some people, and that may account for the fact that ET experiencers tend to be frequent shadow people experiencers.
The shadow people tend to be negative. I mean, always a bad experience around shadow people generally, too.
Yeah. Oh, almost always. I've collected hundreds of cases.
Like almost every
Always
single
terrified.
report is terror or fear or just doom in general. My brother actually had one of the best shadow person experiences I've heard of. He was in New York at one of the ice skating rings, the outdoor ones, and he was with a friend of his, and he saw the atypical shadow person with the hat and everything across the ring, looking right at him. He turned his head and asked his friend if she saw it, and she said yes. They turned back, and it was halfway across the ring coming towards them already. It was floating, it wasn't walking. They turned away, and they come back, and it was directly behind them. And he said it followed him. And he wouldn't even tell me this till recently. It actually scared him so much, he wouldn't say anything for like 10 years.
Well, I've found that over and over again, that when people have emailed me their stories or told them to me in person, some of them you can hear the fear in their voice. And even if it's been years since they had the experience, they're terrified. and they're terrified to talk about it because so many people feel that whatever it was has a bead on them or a line on them, and thinking about it or talking about it will call it back. Well, that's exactly how the Djinn operate. They, if they become interested in someone, they can get called in very easily. They do this monitoring, and they can manifest. If they kind of want to remind you that they're around and sort of who's boss, they will show up. I've had shadow people visitations, and people do see them. I've had them at night. I've had them during the day. Especially since I started researching them and the Djinn, they've made themselves, more, they've made their presence more known.
They're doing research on you at the same time.
What has been?
Well, I think they keep tabs. Know,
Uh-huh.
Obviously these entities.
They're intelligent.
They're very intelligent, and people know that. They can feel it. They don't want us to know. The shadow person is totally disguised, and I think the hat, they're always wearing a hat. Why a hat? I think there's something about the head they can't completely hide.
They're bald.
Have you ever heard...
They're bald. That's the problem.
They're bald,
so
right. Yeah.
I'm wondering if I am a shadow
people often talk
person.
of like a misshapen head. And we get these drawings and even the photographs where something looks kind of conical or lumpy about the head. So I think that's why they adopt this illusion of a hat. And the fear, they want us to be afraid. First of all, if you're terrified of something, you're not going to stick around to find out what it is. You just want to get away from it. So again, it's like it's a way to keep us from knowing. But also that energy that just rushes out of a person when you're terrified. It's an adrenal thing, and it probably pumps out something that they can absorb and use.
Yeah, I say they might feed on it. Have you ever heard any other stories like my brothers tell me where the thing was actually floating, not walking, but a few inches off the ground, just floating right at him? Has anyone ever said anything like that to you by any chance?
Yes. In fact, most of my cases, shadow people they're never really described as walking. It's like they're gliding, floating. Suddenly they're in one spot, then they're in another.
Exactly what my brother said, to the T.
They glide.
Whatever that experience was terrified my brother like beyond belief. It was an amazing thing because we grew up in a paranormal family, and all of a sudden my brother had wanted nothing to do with paranormal, and it was the weirdest thing. And after years, he finally told me this experience, and it changed his life.
Now, you also had another book out this year on haunted Salem, and I guess you've spent your time in that area doing some research on the current hauntings and recent stories that have gone throughout history, haven't you?
I have, and I'm not very far from Salem. I'm only about 3 hours down the road. I've spent a lot of time in Salem over the years. My first book, encyclopedia on witches and witchcraft, came out in 1989, and for that book, I started spending a fair amount of time in Salem. And I've gotten to know people in the magical and Wiccan communities up there. It's always fascinated me. It's an intensely active city, and a lot of the hauntings, of course, go back to the 1692-93 witch hysteria. So it's a very, things come very full circle for me from a historical perspective into the modern paranormal encounter perspective. And in Haunted Salem, I include 35 places that are public that people can visit. Historical places, parks, cemeteries, the historical attractions, places where you can stay, like the bed and breakfasts and hotels, and places where you can eat that are haunted. And I, unlike a lot of regional ghost guides, I put in a lot of history about the founding of Salem, the factors that led up to the witch hysteria. I summarize that. I talk about the curses that came out of those trials and how they played a role in the centuries on down, and about the reality of curses. And I also talk about why is Salem so haunted. It wasn't just the events, as horrific as they are, but there's something very peculiar about the land there.
So I was going to say
that
possibly
may
the
augment
land.
the hauntings.
Yeah, the land there, the energy about it, or something like that.
Yes, that there are areas where there are geophysical factors that seem to enhance the ability of haunting phenomena to last, to even manifest and last. Salem sits in a big negative magnetic anomaly. That is, the magnetic field there is much lower than in other places. And these seem to be natural portal areas. They're associated with intense paranormal activity that's really what I call broad spectrum. That's everything, you know, UFOs, ghosts, poltergeist, mysterious creatures, you name it. And then there are some very interesting ley lines that go through Salem. And they have historical, we can document historical places and events along these lines and tie them into the modern hauntings today. So it's some very interesting research that makes a trip to haunted Salem a lot more three-dimensional than just going to a place where ghosts are.
All right, thanks for watching New Realms. We'll have a new show weekly until the brand new series comes out this fall. I'm Matt K. Thanks for